Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Grace Hatfield from EHS Daily Advisor, and thank you for tuning into today's episode of Faces of EHS. This is a segment where we feature environmental health and safety professionals and highlight their journeys and hear their thoughts about EHS trends and issues. So today we are joined by Dr. Tim Ludwig, who works as an author for safetydoc.com, and he is also a professor at Appalachian State University. So hi, Tim. How are you today?
Hey, Grace. Happy January to you and all the
Yeah.
listeners out there.
hmm I'm sure it's getting cold up where you are.
We had 16 inches of snow up here in the mountains of North Carolina, so
Yeah.
certainly safe shoveling behaviors were a big part of last week's events.
Yeah, for sure. I'm coming from Houston, so it's definitely not as cold. It's still, only like 45 degrees here. So, um,
Boo-hoo, boo-hoo.
yeah. Okay, well, can you tell us a little bit about your position at Safety Doc or as a
Hmm?
professor, and just, give us a little bit about your job?
Absolutely. Yeah, appreciate the opportunity and really
Mhm.
enjoy reading EHS and what you do there. Let's see. Well, when I was completing my graduate degree in industrial organizational psychology, I worked with E. Scott Geller, who was kind of a guru in behavioral safety at the time.
Mhm.
And through that, gained a lot of experience both on the research side, but also, on the practice side as our career develops. I'm a full professor here in the University of North Carolina system, Appalachian State University, where I have an opportunity to do a lot of research with behavioral issues in safety. Over the years, also got an opportunity to kind of engage in a consulting career with a number of companies, being boy, I've been at it for some 25, no, 35 years. So worked with some of the larger companies, both international and here domestically. And the cool thing about being a professor doing research is that I don't have like a can of beans to sell or anything like that. I can go and listen to a really interesting issue that they may have in safety, hypos, process safety, quality, leadership, and things like that, and work with their teams to develop behavioral solutions. So I guess my career is fundamentally working and kind of customizing things with some larger companies, especially in oil and gas and mining and construction and all those areas where safety is kind of paramount to the type of work. So the work I do here at Appalachian State is in the research that we're currently doing is looking at safety analytics. So I have a couple colleagues who are analytic geeks, and they talk about big data and analytics, and they're doing a lot of work in education and the like. And with all the contacts that I made over the years with some of these larger companies, international companies, they certainly have a lot of data, right? They got a lot of near miss data and minor injury data, incident data, all kinds of observation audits and all that kind of stuff. And we're currently got a grant with the federal government to mine all this data, if you will, work with the subject matter experts there in these companies, and try to find some safety truths as we go through it. A friend of mine, Chuck Pettinger, has been doing that for many years. So I guess I drank a little bit of that Kool-Aid as well. So
Mhm.
yeah, the career's developed, and I think it's just kind of awesome where this all ended up. I remember when I started kind of the safety consultancy along with the research and academic work I do. And at the research, I always thought safety is kind of like an applied laboratory to test the kind of behavioral things that I wanted to look at, from a
Mhm.
scholarly perspective. And then when I started, working with crews of folks out there on the front line, engaging in hazards and working with each other to reduce at-risk behavior, I remember being up in Newfoundland. Out, we did a whole workshop with their team of frontline workers that worked out on a floating refinery out where the Titanic sunk. So these
Oh,
guys are,
wow.
they're out there spending 3 weeks on this big, huge barge, which is a floating refinery, and had an opportunity to spend the day with them. Then we all went out, had had dinner and had drinks and stuff. And I remember walking back to my hotel and calling Scott Geller and saying, I finally get it. This is a mission driven kind of thing. It's not just a researchy intellectual thing. This is important stuff. So I
Yeah.
drank the Kool-Aid about 15 years ago, and I've been going full force ever since.
Awesome. Well, you actually answered my next question, which was going to be, how did you get your start? So, that's amazing. That the Titanic. Wow, that's crazy. Um, so I guess to jump to the next thing, what is your best mistake and what did you learn from it?
Oh, my best mistake. Wow, that's a great question, Grace. I'm going to go back to so when I got out of grad school.
Mhm.
This is a couple decades ago. I started working with the Department of Defense,
Mm,
and I was really into strategic planning and measurement systems. There was a kind of guru out at the time. My I consider my gurus like B.F. Skinner and the like, but there's a management guru at the time named W. Edwards Deming who really influenced a lot of our thinking in terms of systems and how to build systems that create the environments for behavior. And but during that time, I was doing strategic planning, and then when you asked the question, this is the first thing that popped to mind. I'd been working with a captain and the like, and he had worked his way up to being the admiral of a major production area, kind of they're making the new ships that you can shoot other ships out of. Really interesting
mhm,
stuff. And we were doing a big strategic planning session, and I remember I was up kind of giving them an educational intervention on how to improve their processes and how to think strategically about different scenarios that may present themselves as they're building their 5-year budgets and things like that. And I didn't seem to be connecting with them. I had been working with them for a while, right? And I didn't
mhm,
seem to really be connecting. And the admiral came over and kind of pulled me aside and he goes, "You use too many large words. Try to keep it below 3 syllables." So, as an
mhm,
educator, I guess I think of myself as an educator, both at the university and as I do keynotes and things like that. And I used to write in very scholarly terms and try to impress myself and things like that. And I finally realized that I teach all the time and I bring the material to the level of the student, and I was fairly successful at it. I had a lot of years of preparation and practice at it. And so it's very much the same when you're out and you're working with business leaders or you're working with frontline employees. The brain learns through stories, and instead of kind of coming at it and try to describe some theoretical constructs of some principles and behavior, you
mhm.
get across by telling stories. And
Yeah,
so the things I write in safetydoc.com, the blogs and the like, very storytelling. My book Dysfunctional Practice is just a series of stories. When I do keynotes, it's just stories. And I guess I appreciate that admiral coming and saying,
yeah,
hey, listen, dude, why don't you make it in
yeah.
terms that we can understand, and have to call him up and tell him thank you.
Yeah, and I find that very inspiring because that's kind of what we're trying to do here with Faces of EHS is we're trying to tell y'all stories, in the EHS world, because it's super important. So, my next question is, what is your favorite and least favorite part of working in the industry, and would you change anything?
Well, my favorite part, without hesitation, is working with the front line.
Hmm.
That's where the risks are taken, and that's where all the wisdom is. When you work with leaders or managers, safety pros, and they've kind of run into a wall in terms of their effectiveness or what the next step is or how to get out the plateau or any of
Hmm.
those themes. The answer is always hanging out with the front line. They
Hmm.
know if you learn how to ask them and you give them a safe environment to talk,
Hmm.
and without hesitation, every time I have an opportunity to go and interview frontline folks or maybe work with behavioral safety teams, which are kind of employee led and designed, you see the energy and the commitment and the compassion there, of course, in these
Hmm.
individuals. But you also learn something every single time that kind of disrupts maybe the way you're approaching it, and
Mhm.
to add some flavor to that. On top of me talking to them, I love to take the executives
Mhm.
down to the front line and just watch. They're almost like school kids on a field trip. Their eyes get big and they remember their passion and why they do what they do, and they realize how much they don't know.
Mhm.
They've got these processes and programs and things like that that they assume they just put in place. They haven't really thought about it behaviorally, but then when they go to the front line, they learn a lot. It reminds me of I was in South Africa before COVID, and we were implementing a series of coaches, behavioral coaches, that would go out with these contractors in mining construction that were from local folks out in Africa. So there's a lot of professional learning and stuff as these contractors go and on site. And we were building
Mhm.
coaches to shape them up and get them to a high level of performance, safety, and otherwise. Of course, we had to convince the brass that this is what we wanted to do, and we needed their support and the like. So we brought them out. We flew out, but then went about 4-hour drive way out into the bush and went to this major mine and sat down with them. At the beginning, they were kind of all hum ho and kind of in the boardroom, but then we went out to the field, and they got the chance to watch these contractors work,
Mm.
bricklayers, earthworks, and they got to watch them work. And then we required them to try to give them feedback. I could act like they're a coach, and I went
Mhm.
back to the boardroom in the afternoon, and they sounded like they were on recess. They were having a blast. They were getting all excited
Yeah.
and things like that. And so the next day, when we took them out and showed them the toolbox talks, and they were seeing the supervisors trying to do the toolbox talks perfectly, right? They understood that they
Mhm.
designed some systems that these folks couldn't do.
Mhm.
And they really started understanding that they needed to take a behavioral approach to all these safety management systems that they thought if they just threw out there, everybody would adopt. Okay, well, the second part of your
Mhm.
question was okay. So, what was the most favorite, least favorite, right?
Mhm. Yes, yes, yeah.
Least favorite. You know what really irks me is so I'm a behavior analyst. I'm a behavioral psychologist, and the behavioral approach to safety has been around for 45 years, right?
Mhm.
And it became a marketplace for what was called behavior based safety. And because it got to be a marketplace, and I've put together programs like that, fixed programs like that, criticized programs like that, but
Mhm.
because it's in the marketplace and you got all these consultants kind of competing for that space, the EHS space, it became a competition, an uninformed competition, where people are
Mm.
competing with each other. And HOP came in and said, BBS is dead, and there's going to be another Zeitgeist, and every time I see a new one come, and then I read on it, it's profound. There's some really, really good stuff there, but it doesn't preclude the last thing.
Mm.
So from a behavioral perspective, we go and look at the behavior of an employee who may be doing an at-risk behavior as a product of the environment they're in. We don't
Mhm.
blame the worker. We're completely opposite. We don't.
Yeah.
Skinner
Yeah.
taught us that the worker's always right, and
Mhm.
when you watch an at-risk behavior, that gives you an indication of how you shape the environment. You perfectly shape their environment to get that behavior. And
Mhm.
so, what Deming taught us in our science, we look to, okay, so what's the systems, the systems that we have in place, both safety systems, management systems, how we organize ourselves, how maintenance does planning, how procurement puts tools on site, all these things that maybe happen in the head office by people who don't interact with the front line, often days before, that impact the frontline worker and influences
Mhm.
their behavior. And so when that was a big part of behavioral safety, when HOP came along, that's a lot of thinking in the kind of systems that impact behavior. And
Yeah.
we weren't at odds with each other. My friends in HOP, and I've done plenty of podcasts with HOP folks, and we're just like, we're talking the same thing. Yet
Hmm.
at ASSP and other places, there's these big debates on which one's dead and which one's alive. And I just thought that really distracts us. And it's going to
Yeah.
happen again. And I think it really distracts us. We should be there for the frontline worker. And we should
Hmm.
be taking all our intellectual power and all our energy and compassion and put it for this common mission instead of trying to one up or create the new market or something like that. I'm sure in your magazine and your podcast you get a ton of that kind of stuff. So yeah,
Yeah, for
that
sure.
really irks me. That's the one that's a thorn in all our side.
Yeah, and kind of to piggyback off of what you said with being there on the front line, how can safety leaders make safety a truly a value in their organization?
Yeah, I I do this little gig when it was in one of my keynote speeches,
Hmm.
saying, "Oh, you know what? Really, I find insulting is when a leader or a consultant comes in and does a speech and says the workers just have to value safety. It has to be in their hearts and minds." And I find that
Yeah.
insulting because that's assuming that there's workers and leaders out there that don't value safety. That,
Hmm.
that's not that's BS, right? If
Yeah.
we all had the going in position that nobody wants to come to work to get hurt or to hurt anybody else through their actions or decisions, we can just skip all that and go
Hmm.
directly to what really matters. So I like to redefine value, really. So if you think about you think about my computer that I'm talking to you on, I value it, right? My watch
Hmm.
I value, my car I value. Why would you assume that I value these things? Because it's in my heart and mind.
Yeah.
Yes, I like it, but the reason it's valuable is because it's useful to me. I
Hmm.
use it, right? It helps me. It adds value to my life. It helps me achieve what I want to achieve. It protects me. Therefore, since it's useful to me, I'm willing to pay for it, right?
Hmm.
And that's in the marketplace, that's what value means: something that's useful and you're willing to pay for. So when a question comes across like what do we see a value being in safety, let's
Hmm.
get more operational and say, when you're putting together a safety management system, let's say a behavioral observation system or an audit system or any of the categories above, is it valuable to the workers who already value safety, but is it
Yeah.
valuable to them? Is it useful? Does it help them be safer?
Hmm.
Period. And if it
Yeah.
does, then the workers will engage with it. They will spend their time, effort, their reputation, if they're doing
Hmm.
observations of other people, and they're willing to spend this because they see the value in what these safety management systems are trying to do. And that'd
Yeah.
be the same thing as leaders and safety pros engage with the front line, finding out what they value, right?
Hmm.
In their work and where they and the protections that are put in place, and understand what is valuable to these workers and build systems that provide that value, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
as a behaviorist, as a Skinnerian, I don't really think a lot of I like to tell at the beginning of my speeches, I like to say, I'm a behavioral psychologist, which means I don't really care what you think, or I don't even care what you feel. I care what you do, and the bottom line is what you do. So
Hmm.
a behavioral version of value, I think, is more instructive.
Hmm.
It's not You're not just throwing fancy words out that make people feel good. You're actually considering value as a way of helping people be safer, as opposed
Hmm.
to coming up with some fiction about what's happening in somebody's mind, which is already there. It's already
Yeah.
there. People already value
Absolutely.
safety. We
Yeah.
just got to put them in a position to act on those values.
Yeah. Well, that's a great insight. I might have to revise my question. Um, so where do you see the EHS industry heading, say, in the next 5 years? Are you seeing any current trends now?
Yeah. Yeah, so I do an annual safety summit here at
Mhm.
Appalachian State, where we try to address kind of like what's the next phase in like behavioral safety. Obviously, the
Mhm.
professional safety, focusing around hazards and energies and physics and chemistry, as well as other things like analytics, like we spoke of earlier. Those things are all starting to grow as we see more of a systemic approach to EHS. And a friend of mine who is an editor, always kind of asking people, what is the future of EHS? And so it's a good question. I think, where I'm seeing, at least in my sphere, is a couple things. First of all, COVID
Mhm.
is changing the way we work, the way we approach health and
Mhm.
wellness in the workplace. So I work with a not for profit called the Cambridge Center for Behavioral Studies. Its mission is to apply behavior science in all its forms to reduce human suffering, and that can be in autism clinics, that can be in schools and policing. We have a lot of colleagues out there doing a lot of things, but my commission goes around and accredits the best in practice behavioral safety programs in the world. So we got about 23 of them, and one of them is a company called Costain. They're a general major civil contractor over in England. They're building the trains and the nuclear facilities for their country. And part of the commission is to go and accredit that their behavioral programs are the best in the world, right? But kind of the method behind the madness is folks like me and my colleagues in the commission get to go see the innovations that they're doing. And one thing that
Mhm.
Costain has taught me is, about 6 years ago, when I was over there in Britain and doing our site review, they started teaching me that in the construction workplace, people in that labor group are 4 times more likely to commit suicide than the
Oh,
national
wow.
average. And they considered they took responsibility for that in their supply chain, in their contractor base, and built a fairly large program, at one of which included like mental health first aid, where frontline
Mhm.
supervisors and managers and project managers had who had maybe worked through their own mental health issues would be very vocal about it and opened up the conversation. And so if you're having a bad day, you're having marital problems, or maybe
Mhm.
suffering from anxiety or depression or something like that, or you knew somebody in your work group that perhaps you could go to this person, and it was a safe space to have that conversation. Of course, they could
Mhm.
refer you and they keep their eye on you and stuff like that. So, wow, that was a slap in the face. I mean,
Yeah.
for me, is a big blind spot. Here's a behavioral approach to wellness as a critical issue in their industry, and so you start seeing more and more of wellness being, you have HSE or Chi or whatever, and you got health in there. It's kind of like making sure we're not poisoning people with our
Yeah.
fumes. They're expanding that notion to wellness, and I think the concept of total wellness and the like, you start seeing the connection between safety and these wellness issues. 'Cause
Mhm.
kind of the baseline of when you go to work, your ability to pay attention, your willingness to help somebody else and actively care. I think there's a lot to having a bedrock wellness program,
Mhm.
which I think other safety programs can really surge from. Other answers to your question, I think, are analytics. I think we're having struggling in our safety analytics research. There's some out there, a company called Predictive Solutions, where Chuck Pettinger, if you haven't interviewed him, definitely do it. He's been looking at analytics and behavioral observation for many years, and has been really productive in finding some really cool safety truths. But and there's a number of articles out in the construction industry where they've taken big data and been able to find patterns in scheduling and overtime
Mhm.
and emergency maintenance and stuff like that. But we're working with three of the larger companies in the world and gathering all their data. And while I'd like to say analytics is kind of the next gen, we're finding out companies just aren't ready yet. They just don't have the
Mm.
discipline around their measurement systems. Common platform, common database, uh, operational definitions. The kind of things that can allow you to take all the data across an enterprise and put it in one bucket and
Mhm.
start making correlations and eventually modeling some of the things that be predictive of safety incidents. And I think there's a lot of work to do. So next gen, maybe next gen, but I think
Mhm.
the world is going to more electronic formats or more electronic data collection, which will allow that. And certainly in my colleagues' fields, there is a lot of utility to these analytic issues that are coming out. But I
Mhm.
still think I still think behavioral safety has a lot to contribute in all
Yeah.
these fields, in wellness and in analytics. And the reason I'm involved with it, because there's a lot of behavioral data that's quite predictive, but also
Mhm.
in the growing zeitgeist of what does it mean to be a safety leader,
Mhm.
manage safety, and there will always be the place for engaging the frontline worker.
Yeah, absolutely. And we kind of at EHS Daily Advisor, we always talk about safety culture, right, as
Mhm.
a value. So I guess, what are your thoughts on safety culture and how do you think it'll look in the future?
All right, you're asking a behaviorist again. So we already
Yeah.
had that discussion about value, right? So it's got to be
Mhm.
useful. It's got to be useful. Culture, I'm a psychologist, so I got trained in dealing with words that don't mean anything. We call them
Mhm.
in our science and psychology, we call them constructs. Like
Yeah.
love and empathy and you know and other I could go on.
Yeah.
All these constructs in psychology. We call them constructs because we just made it. We came up with a word and a definition to try to explain this covert feeling, thought, phenomena. And so I'm quite practiced in being familiar and comfortable with words that don't mean anything. And
Mhm.
culture is one of them, right?
Yeah.
And culture I've never ever been comfortable with. I've
Really?
seen the definitions. Shared beliefs and values. You've already talked about value, right?
Mhm.
Going above and beyond what you're doing when nobody's watching. And when you have multiple definitions of something, that means we don't really know what it is. And
Yeah.
I'll do this gig with leaders going, you believe safety culture is going to make a big difference? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, what is it? You
Mhm.
just don't know. They don't know. Admit it. You don't know.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'd be doing something. And the thing is, it's like a touchy feely, value laden concept that if we just had it, and I don't know what it is, but I'll know it when I see it. And if we just
Mhm.
had it, it'll make a big difference because I've seen other plants, I've seen other sites where everybody's engaged with each other and they seem to share something and they're looking out for each other and it's good. It really reduces injuries.
Mhm.
So I write in my book, let's come up with a different definition for culture, a behavioral
Mhm.
definition. That one. So from a behavioral standpoint, we want to identify something we could see, we can observe people do, right,
Mhm.
and we can measure. And if we can see
Mhm.
and measure it, then we can apply our science to it, and then change it. We can influence it, but we can only
Mhm.
influence if we can see and measure it. So the answer was simple. The answer was simple. Safety culture is people talking to each other about safety, period.
Hmm. Yeah.
Talking. I mean, you can see talking, it's a behavior,
Mhm.
you can measure it, and therefore you can change it.
Yeah.
It's not so when an employee stops what they're doing and coaches another employee about a risk that they're taking, does that help
Mhm.
safety? Yeah. What's happening? Talking. When a manager or a supervisor spends extra time in their toolbox talk, having the employees identify hazards and talk about what they're going to do in their tasks today to avoid a hazard, does that help
Mhm.
safety? Yes. What's happening? Talking. When a
Mhm.
leader, CEO of a company, when she decides on making a budget decision, stops before making a decision, asks people what the safety implications are of that budget decision. What's happening? Talking. That helps. And so how do you get shared values and beliefs if there's such a things as those? It's people talking to each other. Now
Yeah.
keep in mind that talking could create a negative safety culture too. When
Mhm.
a worker kind of chides another worker, hey, don't do all these extra steps, you're not going to get hurt, we need to get this done. Or a supervisor
Famous
um, you
last
know
words.
says exactly.
Yeah.
And so the talking can lead to a negative safety culture. So if we look at
Mhm.
safety culture as talking, then we can look at our safety management systems, which are just fancy ways of talking, right?
Mhm.
Just fancy ways of talking. When you're doing an audit, right, you're trying to get information and talk to people about what we could do to improve and relay that information to people that can help. That's just a fancy form of talking. Our toolbox talks, the beginning of shift talks, our behavioral observations, these are all ways, standardized and otherwise, of talking, right? And so
Mhm.
if we kind of get away from this mystical notion of culture and get at what it really is, we can design our workplaces, our safety management systems, and our relationships to encourage, to reinforce talking.
Yeah.
And many, many different ways of doing it. And I'll guarantee you, because I've done it many, many, many times over my career,
Hmm.
you invest and you're successful at reinforcing systems that get frontline leaders, frontline to talk to each other and to talk to management, and having this milieu of people talking to each other, you will create that culture that you're looking for.
Awesome. All right. So, kind of to pivot back to you specifically, what are you most proud of, whether in your life or your career or?
Oh boy. Well, these are tough questions. You're really good.
Thank you.
What a, what am I most proud of? Beyond family and the kind of world that close friends and loved ones provide. Beyond
Mhm.
that, I think in my professional career, I look back at the faces of those folks who were out drinking with that were on the floating refinery up in Newfoundland. I look at the faces of the contractors and my coaches down in South Africa as they
Mhm.
discover they can have conversations about safety without being threatened and without being chided. They can use reinforcement. Refinery workers who are on our accredited behavioral safety teams, when we go and we award them, saying you're one of the best in practice behavioral safety programs ever, and thank you for teaching us how to do it. And the pride in their eyes, the frontline worker who disagrees, and is
Mhm.
really upset with the situation that they're in, and blame management for it, and the passion in their eyes, even though they're stuck, the passion in their eyes. So, proudest moment, I guess it's taking pride in other people, right? Taking pride in the success and the
Mhm.
and the compassion and the what would you call it, the spirit of the frontline worker. And I guess to bring it back to things I've done is working with these workers and equipping them with the tools and the communication styles, as well as the process to integrate what they're doing into the company's safety management systems.
Mhm.
And those moments, right, where you got this collegiality and a team that is ready to go out and do it. The
Mhm.
seeing the energy in that, uh, even though of course the injuries and the reduction in injuries and the growth of their system, kind of lags that. And of course, I'm very proud of those successes.
Mhm.
But I think just having spending time with a team and just seeing that energy, that's that.
That's
Oh, you got
awesome.
me all
Yeah.
got me all excited today. Look at this.
I'm glad. And then my final question is, do you have any advice for people entering the EHS world, entering the profession?
Yeah. Um, some of my favorite people in this career are those folks who dedicated their career and their life really
Mhm.
to reducing injury, reducing human suffering. Kind of like our mission in the Cambridge Center. And as you met many, many, many of these folks, you see they come from everywhere, so many different backgrounds. Some from the front line,
Mhm.
some from personal injury or an injury of a family member, which really changed their perspective. Others from kind of an academic perspective, kind of coming at it from the physics and chemistry, if you will.
Mhm.
Others who are consumers of management theory and leadership theory and really want to kind of understand how they can build systems to impact the frontline worker. Others still who are just kind of in the safety world on their way to some other VP of something other, but still understanding that their job now as maybe an EHS manager or executive is going to inform them when they're in charge of the entire operation.
Mhm.
Um, and I think one thing that one thing I would say to these EHS professionals that are starting, and I say to big groups as well, is safety is not your job.
Mhm.
If it was, that means that you're the only person in charge of safety in the whole plant. or the whole, whatever your sphere of influence is, and if everybody thinks safety is your job, then when an issue comes up, they're all going to look to you, right? And as
Mhm.
smart as you are, there is no way that you can identify all the different things that are going to hurt somebody. You
Yeah.
need you need the wisdom of people out on the front line. Say, and I even tell the frontline workers, right? Safety is not your job either, because if it was,
Mhm.
that means you'd stop when you go home, which is silly, right? You don't come to work and get paid to do safety. You're doing safety because it is the right thing. It's a human thing to do. And
Mhm.
so, as a safety professional goes out there, they should neglect this idea that they are the safety pro. Everything has to go through them, and that puts almost too much responsibility on them, right? They need to see their role as the coach and as the supporter of other people's efforts to engage in their own humanity, right? As well as
Mhm.
their wisdom on the job and their position power to reduce injuries and increase wellness there in the workforce. So most of the folks who I talk to that are kind of beginning EHS folks and this next gen of folks, I think they
Mhm.
get that. I think they understand that. Even though they may have gotten a master's degree or something, they learned all the technical stuff, and most of the times they're interacting with PPE vendors
Mhm.
but I think if they want a seat at the boardroom table, instead of just being the person who does the safety talk at the beginning of a management meeting, or trying just to manage those kind of things, instead of like being the person, right?
Mhm.
They are always equipping others to do that. And so, to get a place at the boardroom, they become not only experts in safety, health, and wellness, they become experts in employee engagement
Yeah.
and applying behavioral science and HOP and other things, not only to safety but also to the other challenges of the company, other opportunities of the company, because the behaviors that are involved in maintaining a safe workplace, the
Mhm.
systems involved in maintaining a safe workplace as well, are the same source of excellence that is going to impact the quality, production, a preferred place to work, satisfaction and the like. They're all the same thing. For those of us kind
Mhm.
of outside industry and looking at it more objectively, you see that safety is just an outcome, right,
Mhm.
of many different things that can be negatively affected by production quotas and stuff like that, or positively affected by things that aren't even part of what you consider safety. So the new safety folks out there, the new EHS managers, first of all, get smart on wellness. You know,
Mhm.
dedicate time to wellness. Secondly, safety is not your job. Your job is to make everybody a safety manager and coach that up to speed. And thirdly, consider your expertise as you develop it and get reinforced for it over the course of your career to be part of the team of managers who are approaching other issues in your company around quality, production, service, workplace wellness and happiness,
Mhm.
and be ready and able to contribute there. Because in interacting with these other parts of the company, not only will your value be increased, right? You'll be more sought after, but you'll learn things that they're doing that you can bootstrap on to make
Mhm.
your stuff more effective. So you probably asked for one thing, I gave you three. So
No, you're good. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been absolutely lovely, and I'm really grateful to have been able to talk to you and hear what you have to say. And I'm sure our audience will love to hear all of it.
yeah, well,
So thank you
appreciate
so much.
appreciate you. I invite your audience to go to safety-doc.com and start the conversation. I mean, we are building a community. You, myself, your other guests, everybody listening. We have the same mission, right? So we're building a community. Let's practice that culture of talking and interact with each other. So I invite anybody to go to the website and contact me, and let's do the conversation thing. Keep learning from each other.